are praying. We are We are singing. We are dancing. You can move.
Good morning. Whether you're here in person joining us online or watching later on YouTube, welcome to First Parish and Concord. I'm Reverend Seth Carrier-Ladd, your interim senior minister. My pronouns are he, him. If you're online, please feel welcome to participate fully in the chat. If you're here in person and have questions about the accessibility or the building, please see our ushers or any worship leader. Masks are optional throughout our building, including in this space. We continue to use enhanced ventilation and encourage masking to keep our communal spaces safe for everyone. I invite everyone present here in the sanctuary to turn now and wave to those folks who are joining us online. However you are joining us this morning, thank you for coming. We're glad you're here. Our announcements this morning. After the service, we have Worship Sharing Circle, a small group conversation about the service theme in the Brooks Room here in person and on Zoom, on their Zoom. Then we also have Coffee Hour, a less structured way to connect. So if you want to stay for Coffee Hour on Zoom, you just stay on after the service. Here in person, you get your coffee in the kitchen and mingle in the parish hall afterwards. Our standing committee representative this morning is Jen Izzo. Jen, will you wave for us? Hi, Jen. Jen can answer any questions you have about the church or our governance system. Also happening today after the service, the COIC will host a conversation following up on the sermon series we had in November and December about the First Parish benediction. Please join them in the Bulkley Room at 11:30 a.m. if you wish to share your perspective on whether First Parish should keep the benediction as is, consider revising it, and more. Greeley Room. We've changed again. Okay. Upstairs. Committee on Commission on Institutional Change. Wow, I'm getting so much help from the front row. This is fantastic. So that's in the Greeley Room. All right. Later this week, on February 12th, the Environmental Justice Team is showing the feature film Dark Waters about PFAs, which are forever chemicals, from 7 to 9 p.m. at the Umbrella in Concord. Please see Janet Rothrock or anyone from the Environmental Justice Team for more information. And there's a lot more going on here at First Parish, so please check out your Sunday announcements sheet for more announcements, as there is a lot going on. Our opening hymn this morning, number 23, Bring Many Names, was written in 1989. In 1989, including Mother God in the text of the hymn was a big step forward in expanding the boundaries of inclusivity. In the present, 35 years later, our understanding of gender roles has continued to expand, and there now are gender identities missing from this hymn that we would include if we were writing it today. Honoring its history and acknowledging what is missing, we sing this hymn this morning as a reminder of the many ways we name and understand the divine. So let's rise in body or spirit as we sing our opening hymn, number 23 here, Bring Many Names.
Our call to worship this morning is from the poetry of Jalal al-Din Rumi, the 13th century Islamic scholar, theologian, and Sufi mystic. The translation is by Coleman Barks. What is praised is one, so the praise is one too. Many jugs being poured into a huge basin, all religions, all this singing, one song. The differences are just illusion and vanity. Sunlight looks slightly different on this wall than it does on that wall, and a lot different on this other one, but it is still one light. We have borrowed these clothes, these time and space personalities from a light. And when we praise, we pour them back in. Let us worship together this morning. When we join for worship as Unitarian Universalists, our custom is to light the chalice, which is the symbol of our Unitarian Universalist faith. And so I invite you now to join me in our chalice lighting response, which is in your order of service. O flame of our faith, open our hearts and fill our bodies and souls with persistent strength. Enliven our spirits and engage us deeply in this life of ours, this sacred, essential moment now.
Good morning. I'm the Reverend Amy Friedman. I serve as the Minister of Religious Education here. And this morning I have a story to share with you, which comes from a wonderful book, which I recommend highly, called 100 Wisdom Stories from Around the World. It was compiled by Margaret Silf. And it has no attribution, as some of these stories do not, but the story is titled God in Hiding. Now, there's no pictures to go along with the story, only the ones in your mind's eye. So as I tell the story, which includes God and angels, I invite you to notice how your mind pictures God and angels, and if perhaps you might invite in some different imagery from places that you might have encountered, or perhaps that you make up just in this moment. I'll try to read it straight. A legend tells how at the beginning of time, God resolved to hide within creation. As God was wondering how best to do this, angels gathered round. God explained, "I want to hide myself in creation. I need to find a place that is not too easily discovered, for it is in their search for me that my creatures will grow in spirit and in understanding." The first angel suggested, "Why don't you hide deep in the earth?" God pondered for a while and then said, "No, it will not be long before they learn how to mine the earth and discover all the treasures that it contains. They will discover me too quickly, and they will not have enough time to do their growing." So a second angel suggested, "Why don't you hide yourself on the moon?" God thought about this idea for a while and then said, "No, it will take a little longer, but before too long, they will learn how to fly through space. They will arrive on the moon and explore its secrets, and they will discover me too soon before they have enough time to do their growing." So the angels were at a loss as to where God should hide. And there was a long silence. And at last, one angel piped up. "I know. Why don't you hide yourself within their own hearts? They will never think of looking there." "That's it," said God, delighted to have found the perfect hiding place. And so it is that God hides secretly, deep within the heart of every one of God's creatures, until that creature has grown enough in spirit and in understanding to risk the great journey into the secret core of its own being. And there the creature discovers its creator and is rejoined to God for all eternity. Thus ends my wisdom story. So today we have some exciting things happening. Little RE for our preschool and kindergarten has already begun downstairs. If you have little ones, you can bring them down to the Milldam Nursery School. Today our kindergarten through third grade is meeting upstairs in the Emerson room to talk about nature's partnerships, because they are using the World of Wonder curriculum. Jubilee Kids continues with Anderson and myself in the chapel. And this afternoon, our Crossing Paths group is going to meet with our new friends from the Concord Baha'i community. So I'm very excited about that. We also have OWL orientation, and the youth group is getting ready to lead the service next week. So lots of good things happening. I hope that you will be here next Sunday as our youth from high school lead our service. And now let's join together in song.
Every month, First Parish shares the plate with a worthy organization working to do good in the world. This month, our Share the Plate recipient is Robin's House. Jen Turner, the executive director of Robin's House, is here this morning and will now share with us more about the work that they do. Jen?
Good morning. I wanted to thank First Parish for inviting me to speak today and for their generous offer of sharing the plate with the Robin's House this February. My name is Jen Turner, and I am the executive director of the Robin's House, Concord's Museum of African American History. We tell the stories of the lived experiences of African Americans in Concord in the 19th century, in particular through the lives of the Robbins and Garrison families, while also simultaneously connecting those early fights for freedom and equality with modern social justice movements. Ellen Garrison was born in Concord to a family deeply connected to social justice and the anti-slavery movement. She grew up in this village and attended the local public school just across the square from where we are today. Her life was shaped by her deep connections to this community and the struggle for racial equality in the United States. At a parade marking the bicentennial of the town of Concord, Massachusetts in 1835, a 12-year-old Ellen did something unprecedented. She walked hand in hand with one of her classmates. This wouldn't have been a curious sight, two little girls marching together to mark the celebration, except that Ellen was the daughter of a formerly enslaved man. She was Black and was the only person of color to participate in that parade. This early event in her life here in Concord undoubtedly helped set the stage for Ellen Garrison's future actions as a teacher and fighting for equal rights. She went on to teach newly freed people in Boston, Rhode Island, Maryland, North Carolina, and Kansas. She also continued to find ways of speaking out against racial injustice. A high point of her activism came in 1866 when she and a fellow teacher were evicted from a railroad station in Baltimore. She filed a lawsuit to test whether respectable people have rights which are to be respected under the newly enacted Civil Rights Act. Decades before Rosa Parks, Ellen Garrison was acutely aware of the real and symbolic importance of her civic action. "I feel as though I ought to strive to maintain my rights," she wrote in a letter. "It will be a stand for others." We are rightly proud of Ellen Garrison's legacy. We are currently in the middle of a community-wide discussion to name the new middle school after this groundbreaking educator and civil rights activist, the Ellen Garrison Middle School. The Robin's House would like to use the donations raised today in part to help with the creation of a scholarship in Ellen Garrison's name for the Concord Carlisle High School, and we thank you very much for your support.
Thank you, Jen. We will now receive this morning's offering. Please give generously.
Our reading this morning is titled Towers of Babel, and it's by Major Reverend George Tiger, a Unitarian Universalist minister who serves as a United States Army chaplain. He wrote, "I have purchased a set of Islamic prayer beads from one of our local shop owners. The set has 99 beads, one for each of the names of God in Islam. These are not literally God's names, as if we can call God Joe or Bob, but the attributes Muslims ascribe to the holy, including the merciful, the shaper, the sustainer, the loving one." In the biblical story of the Tower of Babel, the people hoped to reach God and make their name famous, as if God were a thing to be used for their own vanity. As a result, the people of the world were scattered into diverse cultures and languages, presumably each with its own understanding of God. In part, this reflects the pre-scientific worldview in which God exists somewhere above us. People thought they could stand face to face with God just by erecting a tall enough building. But the story is also about the human need to own and control things. When so much is out of our control, the lessons of Babel are important for all of us. We can all build towers of Babel when we use God for our own purposes. We can use God to dismiss others, to assert our superiority, to divide people into those who belong and those who don't. If we think God is a thing and a place, like the citizens of Babel did, we tend to decide that God is with us and not them. That is why I like the Islamic notion of 99 names of God. Each of those names is a reminder that God is a reality woven into the very fabric of being. God cannot be named or held or possessed, but must ultimately be experienced as love, justice, mercy, peace, compassion, creator, and more. What names might you find for God? To put it another way, where have you experienced the holy in your life, even here in this place? When does God feel far away? How has the divine been close to you? These questions can tear down the towers of Babel in our minds and bring us down to earth, where God lives every day.
One day last summer, after a brief rainfall, our family decided to take a walk on the beach. Upon our arrival, we saw it, a rainbow. It was magnificent, a full arch with all the colors, the fullest rainbow I have ever seen. It filled me with wonder, being there, witnessing, soaking in nature's beauty. And of course, I immediately pulled out my phone and began taking pictures. But I quickly realized that even with all of our advanced technology, the pictures weren't coming anything close to doing it justice. And so I stopped. I put my phone away and tried to soak it in as best as I could by being present in and treasuring the moment. Making a similar point as the experience I had, there's an old story often ascribed to the Buddhist tradition about a wise teacher trying to teach her students to look at the moon. She points and says, "There it is, tell me what you see." And her students say, "Oh, we see something long and thin and cylindrical and flesh-colored." The point being, often when we're talking about God or the transcendent or the ineffable, sometimes our words at best are just pointing in the direction of what we're trying to understand, and it's good to remember that that's what they're doing. Sometimes even advanced technology falls painfully short when trying to capture the transient beauty of nature. There's an old Christian minister's joke that goes, "Oh, you don't believe in God? Tell me about the God you don't believe in, because I probably don't believe in him either." The joke references the fact that there are many definitions and understandings of what God means, even within Christianity. Often in our country, God is associated with an old white man up in the sky, probably with a beard, sitting on a throne, directing traffic down here on earth. I consider myself a theist, but that is certainly not the God that I believe in. For those theist religions, which is most of them, it is a perennial question with which to wrestle. What do we mean by God exactly, anyway? It took Christianity almost 300 years to settle on the doctrine of the Trinity. And even that hard and fast rule didn't prevent endless conversations about the nature of God, conversations which eventually caused our forebears, the Unitarians, to create their own denomination in opposition to the Trinity. People have been arguing about the nature of God for thousands of years, and that's just within Christianity. In her book, A History of God, The 4,000-Year Quest of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, our author and creator of the Charter for Compassion, Karen Armstrong, wrote, "The human idea of God has a history, since it has always meant something slightly different to each group of people who have used it at various points of time. The idea of God formed in one generation by one set of human beings could be meaningless in another. Indeed, the statement, 'I believe in God,' has no objective meaning as such, but unlike any other statement, only means something in context when proclaimed by a particular community. Consequently, there is no one unchanging idea contained in the word God. Instead, the word contains a whole spectrum of meanings, some of which are contradictory or even mutually exclusive. Had the notion of God not had this flexibility, it would not have survived to become one of the great human ideas. When one conception of God has ceased to have meaning or relevance, it has been quietly discarded and replaced by new theology. A fundamentalist would deny this, since fundamentalism is anti-historical. It believes that Abraham, Moses, and the later prophets all experienced their God in exactly the same way as people do today. Yet if we look at our religions, it becomes clear that there is no objective view of God. Each generation has to create the image of God that works for it. The same is true of atheism. The statement, "I do not believe in God," has meant something slightly different at each period of history. The people who have been dubbed atheists over the years have always denied a particular conception of the divine. Atheism has often been a transitional state. Thus, Jews, Christians, and Muslims were all called atheists by their pagan contemporaries because they had adopted a revolutionary notion of divinity and transcendence. So says Karen Armstrong. The Unitarians were one of those folks who were considered atheists at one point, not because they denied belief in God or even the divinity of Jesus, but just because they believed that their Christian God was one, not in three parts. That made them atheists. Even though they believed that Jesus was the Son of God, just that he wasn't co-equal with God, atheists. The other side of our forebearers, the Universalists, they believed that God was love. God is love preached ministers, evangelized to the lay people for hundreds of years. Love is one of the definitions, one of the names for God that is claimed in our heritage. To be clear, since the Unitarians and Universalists merged in 1961, we Unitarian Universalists as a whole take no stance on the existence of or non-existence of God. We are all free to choose what we believe. Some of us believe in God in one shape or another, some of us do not, and some of us are questioning. Today, though, we are not wrestling with that question or even trying to answer it. We're simply going to explore the varying names of God, since the exploration hopefully has something to offer theists, questioners, and atheists alike. As Michael Dowd, renowned environmentalist and author of Thank God for Evolution, notes, what we call reality, the ancients called God. Languages change over time. Words create worlds. The language that we use to think about reality actually structures and affects our experience of reality. The classic example is that you have two names for snow, dry snow and wet snow. You have a less intimate, less personal, less rich experience of snow than cultures that have half a dozen or more names for different kinds of snow. He continues, the word life didn't exist for the Hebrews. The words wind and breath didn't exist for the Hebrews. The Hebrews named, they personified. They had an I-thou personal relationship to what we call breath and what we call wind. They had the word ruach, ruach Adonai, ruach Elohim, the Spirit of God was their experience. You didn't need to believe in the Spirit of God. You don't need to believe to have breath. You don't believe in your breath. You don't believe in wind. The wind is undeniably real. Breath is undeniably real. He concludes, what we secularize and say wind and breath, they called ruach, the Spirit of God. Now, I'm not trying to make the argument that God is all of reality and thus convert any non-believers in the room to theism, but that is the basic point of Dowd's talk, where the preceding passage comes from. It's titled, What We Call Reality, the Ancients Called God. What I am suggesting is that if we look beyond the box proscribed in Christianity for what God might mean, and expand our thinking to include reality describing aspects of God that exists in other faith traditions, such as Judaism and Islam, that there might be an added richness to our understanding of life and reality for atheists, questioners, and theists alike. As Unitarian Universalist minister and Armley chaplain Reverend George Tiger, Major Reverend Joyce Tiger shared in our reading this morning, this is why I like the Islamic notion of 99 names of God. Each of those names is a reminder that God is a reality woven into the very fabric of being. God cannot be named or held or possessed, but must ultimately be experienced as love, justice, mercy, peace, compassion, creator, and more. Now, not all of the 99 names for God in Islam are ones that most Unitarian Universalists would embrace. The controller, the king, the judge, the dominant, the owner. Many of us would probably have some difficulty seeing reality in those names, or at least the parts of reality that we value. Too often in religion and in cultures worldwide, a system of patriarchy and oppression has existed using words and names such as those. Interestingly, though, if you scroll through the list of 99 names, it's harder, at least for me, to find the ones I object to than it is to see the ones that are meaningful and thought-provoking. The holy, the peace, the evolver, the sustainer, the hearing, the just, the gentle, the repeatedly forgiving. What a wonderful name for God, the repeatedly forgiving. What would it look like to think of the nature of the universe as repeatedly forgiving? Would it change your perspective at all? Would it make any difference to think of the nature of life as repeatedly forgiving? We know we are imperfect human beings. Our first principle reminds us of our inherent worth and dignity at all times, even when we make mistakes. But there's something so gentle to me, something that makes me breathe a little sigh of relief even, to think of the nature of the universe as repeatedly forgiving. And then there's the next one on the list, at least the list I read, the subtly kind. Especially in these days with so much divisiveness in our country, what would it look like to consider the universe as subtly kind? It makes me breathe a little easier, I'll say that. And I'm noticing too that that word keeps coming up, breath, ruach, the spirit of life, not a coincidence. More names from Islam. The giver of honor, the giver of dishonor. The avenger, the pardoner. The giver of life, the bringer of death. The first, the beginningless, the last, the endless. There's a whole sermon here too, just in those names, in the sense of paradox and the complexity in which many great truths lie. One example which we're familiar with, to be or not to be, that is the question. We are often reminded in our busy culture to slow down and smell the roses. Too much doing and we need more being in our lives. But the opposite is true as well. Too much hanging around and just being, and we need more doing. And so the question really isn't to be, or to not to be or to do, the question is not to be or to do. The challenge is to be and to do. As Buddhism reminds us, every moment of doing can also be a moment of being if we are intentional. So far we've actually only talked about 17 of the 99 names of God in Islam. I won't keep us here all morning listing and reflecting on the other 82, but I imagine we're beginning to get the point. Let's consider one other name for God, though, from outside Islam, just to expand things even further. Pagans and paganism often embraces many gods, one of whom is the goddess, or the divine feminine. For the vast majority of Western thought, God had been regarded as he, him, his, as masculine. This comes in large part from the Father-Son analogy in the Trinity, and what a limitation that is. Talk about patriarchy and sexism being wrapped into the very language of religion. Why on earth should the idea of God only be limited to the masculine? Christianity in the United States has taken steps in the past few decades to rectify some of this problem, but paganism, among other religions, has long lifted up the importance of the feminine divine as a valuable, vital name for God. All of this makes me wonder, if we Unitarian Universalists were solely a theistic religion and we had 99 names for God ourselves, what might some of them be? I imagine many of them would be similar to Islam. God is love, God is mercy, God is compassion, God is forgiveness. If you were going to offer names for God, and atheists and questioners, let's just pretend for a moment you believe in God, so we're doing this while we're doing this thought exercise. So if you were going to offer names for God or ultimate reality, what names would you give to it? There is another reason that considering the many names of God is of value to atheist questioners and theists alike. The many different names given to God in different religious traditions lift up what is of value and meaning to them in the world. Take God is love, that statement that was extremely important to the Universalists who preceded us, because they interpreted that to mean that God loved everyone, no matter how many mistakes or wrong things you did on this earth. So that meant everyone went to heaven, since God loved all of us no matter what. It's actually a really powerful message. And it's not too hard to draw a line connecting the dots between that part of our Universalist heritage and our first principle. If God loves everyone, then we all have worth and dignity in God's eyes. Or, inherent worth and dignity. The names we have for God lift up beliefs and values that last and persevere, even when sometimes the belief in God itself changes. Returning to the joke from earlier, tell me about the God you don't believe in, I probably don't believe in him either. If I were to define God as the nature of reality being love, mercy, justice, compassion, and forgiveness, to name just a few, is that a God we could believe in? I fear that we too often get boxed in by the Christianity all around us in our country. Jesus, the Trinity, the God of the Bible, both Hebrew and Christian scriptures. Many of those definitions of God are not ones that I believe in. But love, mercy, justice, compassion, forgiveness, if that was the idea of God that I encountered all around me, I personally would have a lot less to argue with. To be clear, I'm not trying to convince or convert anyone to theism. I am suggesting that perhaps we can begin to approach God with a broader idea of what's possible, compared with the Christian waters we swim in this country. Because in exploring Allah in Islam this morning, and peering briefly through the window of paganism and the goddess, we've also barely begun to scratch the surface of all the different concepts of God out there. Maybe Islam has really hit on something here. If the meaning and mystery of the universe is indescribable, instead of arguing about one definition, maybe our lives and our meaning-making would be richer and fuller by having many definitions, many ways, some even contradictory, in which we talk about all that is good and holy in this world. Friends, as we go about our days, as we go about our weeks, may we find meaning and deeper understanding in considering the 99 and many more names of God. Instead of taking a narrow view of God, may we embrace possibility. May the possibilities of life enrich your own and our shared faith journey. Amen. This is the prayerful section of our service where people share joys and sorrows. Marilyn and Peter Lowett's son Matt was in the hospital this week with pneumonia and sepsis. Thankfully, he is out of the ICU now and doing better. Marilyn is in Colorado and will return once Matt is up and about. Paula Adelson is going in for major dental surgery on Tuesday and would appreciate prayers and encouraging thoughts. And finally, Chris Randall and his family are going through some tough experiences and would also appreciate our thoughts and prayers. Is there anyone else on your heart and in your mind right now? If so, I invite you to call their names aloud or type them into the chat now. There are also often things which are difficult sometimes to name out loud. We pause for another moment of silence for all that remains unspoken on our hearts. There continue to be wars and fighting, cataclysmic weather events, and so many other difficulties around the world. From some of us here at our service this morning to people all the way across the world, there are people who need to be held and loved. We hold those in need and love now. Our prayer this morning is adapted from Joel Tishkin. He wrote, "Whether it is 99 or even just 9, all of us have many names beyond our personal name. Brother, grandmother, spouse, friend, activist, dreamer, artist, entrepreneur, peacemaker, jokester, troublemaker, the sensible one. Among your various names, is there one that is more dormant than you would like it to be, that's in need of revival? Is there one that has outgrown its usefulness and you would like to let it go? Is there one that has been put upon you by others that never quite fit and you wish to cast it away? When we enter into silence, consider one of those names. Which one is worth strengthening? Which one is no longer helpful? Which one needs to go? Let us enter now into a time of silent contemplation and prayer together.
I am the calm in the eye of the storm, come to center. I am the calm in the eye of the storm, take a breath. I am the calm in the eye of the storm, come to center. I am the calm in the eye of the storm. You
Friends, let us not be boxed in by the limits of our imaginations or the imaginations and the constructions of those around us. Whether it is our concept of God or any number of other things we hold dear in our lives, let us imagine and embrace the possibilities to create a more expansive and inclusive world. And now let's rise in body or spirit as we join in singing our closing hymn, number 92, Mysterious Presence, Source of All. Let us say our benediction together. Go out into the world in peace. Perish. Hold on to what is good. Turn into no person evil for evil. Strengthen the faint-hearted. Support the weak. Help the suffering. Honor all beings. Go and be blessed and be a blessing.